Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show, and while you're over there as well, if you could leave us a review, again, that just helps out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
It's going very well, Mark. Good to see you again as ever. How are you getting on?
Not bad, not bad. Work has been miserable, but, I mean, what else is new?
Already? It's only just started.
Well, yeah, we've returned back to work here. It's just as miserable as it was when I left, Lewis. But nobody's interested in that. Nobody's interested in that at all, Lewis. What have you been playing?
Well, Mark, I have been playing a couple of things this week. Well, first of all, I've returned very briefly to Desperados 3, which for anyone who's been listening for a little while now will know I've kind of been playing off and on for a couple of months. That is exactly how I'm going to continue treating that game. It's perfect when you've just got like an hour of free time at the end of a night and you don't want to try too hard. Not that it's not a difficult game, but it's a game that you can just kind of sit and watch and think about until you start making your moves. Really clever. The story's starting to pick up a little bit. But really it's just about solving those little moment-to-moment puzzles of how am I going to get from A to B, how am I going to deal with this objective, and most importantly, how am I going to kill all these guys without being seen, which is really, it can be quite challenging actually. So really enjoying that. Speaking of challenge though, I have finally beaten the Radiance in Hollow Knight.
Yay! Finally! Lewis, I was so happy when you told me this, man. I was so happy. I'm not going to lie. I was so pleased for you.
It was quite a moment. It was the first time I'd returned to Hollow Knight since I sort of beat the rest of the game a month or more ago now. When I first encountered the Radiance and just felt like I couldn't get past it, I was bashing my head against the wall and was really losing my love for the game. It was just, it was too much and I needed to step away from it, and I'm glad that I did. I took some time on Sunday afternoon to put a couple of hours in. I almost quit again, Mark, because after a solid 2 hours of constantly going, I'm stopping here, okay, I'll do one more, no, I'm stopping here, no, I'll do one more, I basically had to chuck it, and I stepped away for about an hour, did some other stuff, and thought, I'll give it one last chance. And then I lost, and then I gave it one more chance, and then I finally did it, which was one of the most, as you said, and as you've said a few times on this show over the time that I was playing the game, the feeling when you finally beat that boss fight is unlike anything else. I mean, not least just because I had already that day alone spent a few hours on it, but the whole pressure of beating it, of getting to the end, of finally overcoming that after all the other challenges that the game throws at you. I mean, I'm not ashamed to say I leapt off of my couch. I screamed out loud, much the same way that I do when my team scores in football. And genuinely, if anyone's listening to this thinking, God, he's being daft, honestly, it brought those emotions about. And I'd also already taken the lesser ending by this point. I decided for a bit of a sense of progress to take the not true ending from the fight before I returned and beat it again. And I was so underwhelmed by that I am very glad that I did return again and properly finish the game. We've used so many superlatives for Hollow Knight on this show. I'm sure you're going to throw a couple extra out in a second, but my God, man, what a game. What a final fight. Total nightmare as it was. That feeling, that rush at the end was worth it.
Yeah, man. It is an absolutely incredible game and an absolutely incredible boss fight. Brutally difficult. But man, I have to say, when I finished the Radiance, it is legitimately one of my proudest moments in gaming that I can point to that and say, it doesn't matter what you've done, I've beat the Radiance to basically any gamer in the world. But I have to admit, man, when you told me you'd finished it as well, because it was a challenge that I'd set for you, I was like over the moon. I was like extremely proud of you in a way that I don't think I've ever been in my entire life. And I was like, yeah, you actually did it. Because I really had reservations about how long you were going to persist with it, because it is such a difficult fight. And I know that your gaming time is difficult for you to game a huge amount all at the one time. And I know that this particular fight would have benefited massively from that, but that's not really how you like to enjoy playing games. and I knew that it was torturing you a little bit, and I was thinking, oh Jesus, is he actually going to ever get around to doing this? But you did, man. And I was absolutely over the moon. Seriously, I was so happy when you text me and just said, that's it, it's done, it's over. I was so pleased, genuinely, I'm so happy for you.
It was so under my skin, the game, that, I had doubts that I was going to go back to it. I had doubts that I would definitely actually beat it, even if I did. But yeah, the perseverance was absolutely worth it, and I cannot recommend Hollow Knight enough to anyone who's yet to play it. And just really quickly, because I'll speak more about it once I've played a little bit more, but this week I also made a wee start on Call of the Sea, which is a sort of first-person puzzle adventure game from Out of the Blue Games. It came out just about a month ago, directly to Xbox Game Pass. It's so far so good, basically, is my comment thus far. It got an interesting story, it's got a really beautiful art style, and some quite challenging puzzles, kind of environmental puzzles by and large. I've found so far that some of the way that the story is told, some of the narration from the lead character is extremely grating. It is so on the nose. It's constantly telling you things that you've already, worked out from the environment or whatever. It's just saying the obvious way too much. And for a story-driven game, I'm finding that quite off-putting.
Yeah, that sounds like a game that doesn't trust the user to get it.
That's exactly what it's like. And it isn't that complex a story, or certainly the things that it's saying out loud aren't very complex ideas to grasp. That plus the actual pace of the game, like the walking speed of the character. There's some puzzles where you have to kind of go from area to area and pick up certain things again and again, like a little loop. And I've found sometimes that I'm just like, God, I just want to get there much faster than this. But I think I'll probably be able to beat it by the time we record next week, hopefully, if I get a wee bit of gaming time this week. So I will say a bit more then.
Fair enough, man. Fair enough.
And what have you been playing, Mark?
Well, Lewis, I have started Persona 5,
Whoa.
which is a game that I have wanted to play for a very, very long time, to be completely honest with you, basically since it came out, and I finally got around to doing it. A big part of the reason why I've taken so long to get around to playing it is because of the length of the game, which I think could be comfortably 90 hours, which is a daunting prospect.
Yeah.
I can totally see that in the game because I have played the game for maybe about 10-ish hours now, and I honestly feel as if I've barely scratched the surface, like to the point that the game is still introducing me to what feels like core mechanics.
Jesus.
It is insane. What I will say is that the story immediately went to somewhere I wasn't expecting it to. Right away, this was into quite a heavy theme that I thought it was dealing with. Interestingly, we will say. I wouldn't say it was overwhelmingly complex or anything like that, but it was just dealing with quite a serious theme quite interestingly, and the story went to places even in the beginning that I thought it wouldn't. It's already not the game that I thought it was going to be, which is quite interesting. However, Lewis, despite having played it for 10 hours, I actually don't have that much to say because, again, I feel as if I've barely got started with the game, which is absolutely wild. So I'm going to hold my tongue for now, and then maybe we'll have a bit of a longer conversation about the game when I've, played 20 hours of it, and then we're into the crux of everything.
If you even are at that point.
Aye, who knows? Who knows, man? It might still be introducing core mechanics at that point.
Have you enjoyed what you've played so far? Has it just felt like a tutorial so far?
I have enjoyed what I've played so far, particularly from the narrative standpoint. I'm not going to lie to you, a lot of the combat has felt tutorial-y, but it is now sort of let the reins off, and I am enjoying it, and it is turn-based combat, which I know puts a lot of people off, but I actually really enjoy that style of combat. It's much more about thinking about what your attacks are going to be rather than like quick reaction times or something like that. It's just a different skill, but I quite enjoy it, and that's why I like a lot of JRPGs like this. So yeah, I still don't feel as if I've really got into the heart of the story yet, or the heart of any of these characters, but really interesting start to the game, I will say. And one of the most stylish games I think I've ever seen in my life. Like, the UI design for this game is ridiculous, and I love it.
Nice.
It must have one of the most stylish UIs I've ever seen. But anyway, Lewis, time for the news. Alright, news item number 1. It has been announced this week, Lewis, that Disney are reviving Lucasfilm Games. Lucasfilm have said this regarding their games division's revival.
Lucasfilm's legacy in gaming stretches back decades, and with Lucasfilm and the galaxy far, far away entering a new and unprecedented phase of creativity, so will the world of Lucasfilm Games, developed in collaboration with the finest studios across the industry. Lucasfilm Games is now the official identity for all gaming titles from Lucasfilm, a name that encompasses the company's rich catalogue of video games and its eye toward the future.
Now, you might be asking yourself, why is this rebranding interesting? Well, I think it's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, because when Disney first purchased Lucasfilm and, of course, the rights to Star Wars, one of the first things they did was shut down LucasArts, which, of course, was the previous video game publishing development arm of Lucasfilm. And now they're reinventing it here. It's also interesting that they've chose not to revive the LucasArts name, but have instead went with Lucasfilm Games, which I believe actually predates LucasArts.
Yeah.
And the reason they changed it to LucasArts was because that's a bad name. It's not good. However, secondly, and by far and away the most interesting, is that in their statement there, they were speaking a lot about the future, and specifically they were looking to collaborate with the finest studios and whatever. So currently, EA has the rights to the Star Wars license until 2023, which is not all that far away anymore. Lewis, what do you think is going to happen after that?
I think that's a really interesting question, and it obviously just conjecture on our part. It's hard now to imagine that they wouldn't pursue the same strategy that they've tried with the Marvel game umbrella, which is in essence to give games an IP to studios who can do something with them rather than to one mega publisher and hope for the best. Obviously, in the last couple of years, the Star Wars EA relationship, which has been pretty rocky at times, has kind of turned around a bit. I think with Jedi Fallen Order, with Star Wars Squadrons, and to a lesser extent, the kind of revival of Star Wars Battlefront.
Well, Battlefront 2 was so...
At launch, absolutely, it was a disaster. And that was probably the first moment where a lot of people were really saying, should EA be stripped of that license altogether? I think that game's kind of turned around a bit now. It's got a lot more fans. It's not as aggressively capitalist as it once was, maybe.
Well, that was the problem, wasn't it? It wasn't that the game was bad, although I think that the story in and of itself was actually very short. But it was all to do with the microtransactions. This is when the whole microtransaction culture came to an incredible crescendo.
Yeah. I just think looking at it overall, they should be thinking about, not to say that EA shouldn't get to make some Star Wars games in future, but if there are other studios out there who are better placed to do that, then why not make that available to them? You know, why be tied into this long-term deal? Obviously, other IPs have sort of relationships with certain studios or whatever, but to give something like Star Wars, such an enormous thing, to one company for a decade, I don't think that's the way forward anymore.
No, me neither. I think that Disney have proven to everyone and themselves that the right way to go about this is to be in control, I suppose, of what types of games are made with your IP. Do you know what I mean? With the Marvel games, Disney are in a position where they're taking pitches from these top developers. Square Enix coming to them for the idea for the Avengers game, or PlayStation coming to them for the Spider-Man games, you know what I mean, and introducing Miles Morales and all that. And God knows how many things they've turned down over the years, you know what I mean? And they could be in the exact same position with Star Wars, where EA comes and says, oh, well, we want to do a dogfighting game, and then, I don't know, Xbox probably comes along and says, oh, well, we want to do the Mandalorian game or something like that, you know? And I think that puts Disney in a much better position for themselves, but also I think that it sets up for better games for players as well. And one of the more interesting developments here, Lewis, is that only a few hours ago, and only one day after the revival of Lucasfilm Games was announced, Bethesda have teased a new Indiana Jones game, which will be developed by Machine Games of Wolfenstein fame and executive produced by Todd Howard of Being Todd Howard, and will be under the umbrella of Lucasfilm Games. Apparently this game, according to Disney, will be a wholly original story set at the height of Indiana Jones's career. Now, before we get into all of the Xbox Bethesda stuff, just this game by itself, Lewis, do you think an Indiana Jones game would work in 2021? The reason why I'm saying that is because we are in a post-Uncharted world, which was basically Indiana Jones, wasn't it? With guns, because Indiana Jones doesn't really do guns. And I'm wondering, if you strip the guns and the big shootouts from Uncharted, how much of a game have you got there, you know?
I mean, I wouldn't be stunned if they take some license with that and add guns just because it's the primary video game interaction mechanic, but I think that there could still be something there. I mean, yeah, let's not beat about the bush. Both Tomb Raider and Uncharted have done Indiana Jones in video game form before. You know, there's been an Indiana Jones video game before, obviously. And so, can this work? Yeah. Will it work? That'll be interesting. Machine Games, as you mentioned there, they made some fantastic Wolfenstein games, but they're first-person shooters, and they're, you know, story-driven in one sense, but also very much action set-piece shooting sequence-driven. So it'll be interesting to see what Machine Games brings to the IP, because, I mean, in my head, it's a third-person action game.
Action-adventure,
yeah.
totally.
It's surely got to be based on the IP, right? But what can they bring to it? What ways can they freshen it up so it doesn't just feel like Uncharted 5 but set 30 years earlier or something? Maybe it'll be slightly more stealth focused, maybe it'll be slightly more puzzle focused. I don't know. Are you interested in that at all?
Honestly, I don't know. When I initially saw the little tease trailer, I was thinking, oh god, that's really cool. But now that I start thinking about it, I don't know if they're going to give Indiana Jones a rocket launcher. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if that's something that Disney would even allow for that property, you know? And I think that if you remove things like that from the Uncharted games, the spectacle of it all, and I'm not saying that the game couldn't have spectacle, but if you're just Indiana Jones and in reality you're just kicking about with your whip, which is what Indiana Jones was, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's not James fucking Bond, do you know what I mean? He's an archaeologist. How is that going to work? Maybe it would be more stealth focused. Maybe I'd be more interested in it if it were more stealth focused, to be honest, but I don't know about this game yet. I have a totally open mind, and if they're going to do something interesting with it, I would be all aboard. Machine Games are a great studio. It's in good hands. I'm just not entirely sure how this works in a post-Uncharted world, really, you know what I mean? Yeah. Which basically took Indiana Jones and video gamed it very, very well, you know? But Lewis, the elephant in the room here. Xbox have obviously bought Bethesda for $7.5 billion. This is the first Bethesda game to be announced since that purchase. I think it's safe to say that this game will be on Game Pass day one, almost without question. Do you think that this game ever sees the light of day on a PlayStation console?
I'm not sure. I think probably not, to be honest. That's the direction I'm leaning in just now. Obviously, I've said countless times that I'm not ruling out the possibility of Bethesda games, particularly their biggest games, still appearing on PlayStation, but I think there's a few things here that would say to me that it won't be. Uncharted is the most obvious one. I think that there's almost an element of this game is made to be Xbox's Uncharted, their big third-person, high-spectacle action-adventure game. You know, also, if PlayStation want to continue with Uncharted in any form, I don't see that those two games can necessarily sit too well together. There was a bit of a relationship before as well between Xbox and the latter-day Tomb Raider games, so again, that could just be filling that gap. And I also think that we've spoken a bit about the Spider-Man PlayStation relationship, that Disney kind of went there and made that a real exclusive thing. A lot of people have been talking ever since about, you know, what can Xbox do to compete with that? Don't they want a Star Wars game? Don't they want something of that ilk? And this feels like it could be that, or one of their versions of that, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree, to be honest with you. I've always been much more on the side of these Bethesda games very soon will not be on PlayStation at all, and I would be very surprised if this Indiana Jones game ever came to a PlayStation console, honestly. And that, unfortunately, is the sad reality for us PlayStation gamers of the Xbox purchase of Bethesda. But there we go. I guess we'll have to buy Series X now, right? And that's what Xbox wants, so they win. Alright, Lewis, news item number 2. A data mine of the latest Nintendo Switch firmware apparently makes reference to an upgraded Switch model, which is very exciting. This comes from a gentleman by the name of Cyrez M, who is apparently a respected data miner, who claims that the new hardware is codenamed ULA, which is A-U-L-A. Not entirely sure how to pronounce that, but I'm going with ULA. Mr. Cyrez M suggests that the chip that will be used in the new Switch hardware will be the same as the Switch Lite and the updated 2019 Switch, but will have a higher clock speed. He also claims that the new model will have an upgraded screen and that screen will be OLED, which I think is very interesting, and it will support 4K. However, he also speculates that the display resolution on handheld mode would be the same as it currently is, and 4K would be while you're playing on your TV when you're playing docked on your Switch. This also follows a report from back in September from Bloomberg that reported that Nintendo asked devs to make their existing games 4K ready, quotes. The same report from September suggested that Nintendo would be targeting an early 2021 release of the new hardware as well, and if it is true that the new model is being mentioned in the latest firmware, maybe that's true.
Are you pinning all your hopes on this, Mark?
Well, I'm still very interested in it, Lewis, I've got to say. I think that the OLED screen, I would be shocked if it was an OLED screen, honestly. And there's a big part of me that doesn't want it to be an OLED screen, because if it's an OLED screen, that will be very expensive.
Yeah.
As someone who has very recently looked into spending an inordinate amount of money on a fancy-dancy OLED TV, I'm not entirely sure I want one on the Switch. What do you think about if it came out soon as well? I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. Like, if it comes out in the next couple of months, say, if Nintendo are gearing up for an announcement, say, in the next few weeks, and it comes out a couple of months after that or whatever, I'm not sure that that is far enough away from the launch of the PS5 and the Series X, and because of the stock issues of the PlayStation 5 and the Series X, I think a lot of people are still waiting to buy those consoles before they would be interested in upgrading their Switch, you know?
Perhaps, yeah. That's an interesting spin on it that I hadn't really considered, because, I mean, we've seen that the Switch has continued to outsell the new generation on Xbox and PlayStation, you know, which is also about availability. Let's not kid ourselves on about that. There's huge demand
a lot
for
about
those,
availability, but
you know, it's still selling incredibly well. And so I could see a world in which they think, actually, if we get a Pro model out sooner rather than later, while it's still really difficult to get those consoles, we might sell more. We might catch people who are sick of trying to log on to Amazon and get a hold of a PS5 every couple of days when when that one tweet goes out saying they're available quickly. People might just go, actually, here's the Switch, which I've also been thinking about getting. There's all these games there, particularly if it comes bundled with an announcement of Breath of the Wild 2 or some new Super Mario Odyssey 2, perhaps, or any of those huge games. I think that that's not a terrible strategy. I almost think that that might be better than waiting until deep into next year when people have already made a console purchase in the calendar year and might think that two, particularly if one of them is an upgrade in terms of the Switch, you know, rather than a full new piece of hardware, that might be off-putting. So I thought it was further out, to be honest, but maybe now I'm actually starting to come around to the idea that they could be announcing something fairly soon. Well,
according to Bloomberg, they were targeting early 2021, so if we got an announcement, say in the next month or so, and it came out in, I don't know, say the spring, say the early spring or something like that, maybe into the summer even, I think that that would be better than if it came out like now. This would never happen because pre-orders and whatever, but if Nintendo just said, oh, it's out today, I think that that would be a bad move. I get what you're saying, but I think a lot more people will be focused on next-gen hardware, do you know what I mean? Like, this is the console that I will be playing for the next, 7 or 8 years. God knows how long the next generation is going to last. Whereas the Switch, by and large, for most people that would be excited to buy it, will be an upgrade to an existing system that they probably already have, you know? I don't know, in my head, that seems like a bit of a dodgy move. If I were Nintendo, basically, I wouldn't want to be competing with people who wanted a PlayStation 5 and a Series X. I would want most of those people to already have their console, and then for them to turn around and say, oh well, that Switch that you've got lying there, look at this fancy version that we've got over here now, you know?
Yeah.
But I can see it both ways, to be honest with you. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with the Switch Pro, but I think increasingly it's looking inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, it would be quite hard to imagine now that Nintendo just ignore the clamour for it or can't find a solution to the things that people are asking for. I'm still of the mindset that it's not strictly necessary, and given this, you know, it's running the same chip.
It's not necessary at all. It's not necessary at all. Like, anyone who's like feeling obligated to upgrade their Switch, I really don't think that you should feel that way. But for me, who is quite pedantic about things like pop-in on Breath of the Wild, I really want it. Like, I really want it a lot, to be honest.
To my mind, just from the things that are being reported here, you know, like, I couldn't care less about that screen, largely actually because I still play it docked most of the time, partly given the pandemic and everything else, but The fact that it will still be 720p in handheld, that's probably is something that I would rather they focused on improving rather than hitting 4K on big screens. But it's, everyone's going to have different things that they want from it or that they would hope to get from it. Interesting that there's 2 massive Nintendo IP anniversaries this year, and it's also only a couple of months until the Switch turns 4 years old. I think it was in March it came out, March 2017.
Yeah, I think
all of
that's
those
right,
things coalescing around this. It's Mario's 35th birthday celebration in March. We know it's a big Zelda anniversary this year. Breath of the Wild 2 is on its way. It feels like it's got to be this year that we see something, I think.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense as well, to be honest. Alright, Lewis, and news item number 3. CD Projekt Red have come under investigation by the Polish Office of Competition and Consumer Protection as things continue to go from bad to worse since the release of Cyberpunk 2077. This consumer watchdog, which is apparently known as the UOKiK, obviously those would be initials that would make sense in Polish, has made this statement regarding the investigation.
We will check how the manufacturer is working on the introduction of amendments or solutions to difficulties preventing the game from working on different consoles, but also how it intends to act in relation to the persons who filed complaints and are dissatisfied with their purchase due to the inability to play the game on owned equipment despite previous assurances that it would.
It's also worth pointing out that that statement was lifted from a gamesindustry.biz article, which links in the show notes as always over at PlayersToo.com, but also that was translated using Google Translate, which is why the English might not be brilliant there. However, I think that the message here is clear. The game does not work on the consoles. It still does not work on the consoles, and it's come out over a month ago now. The game still is not available on the PS Store and still comes with a warning on Xbox. The game is still riddled with bugs on all platforms, but consoles, particularly the last gen consoles, have suffered the brunt of that. The game remains basically unplayable on the PS4 and the Xbox One, and considering this is a last gen game, this game launched on the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, not on the PlayStation 5 or the Series X. This is still a last gen game, and that game does not run on the consoles that it was intended to run on. Absolutely madness. There have been no major patches, and we can assume that the mandatory crunch imposed to complete the game in the first place is still taking place, and the overworking of the devs is just an ongoing thing at CDPR, almost certainly. This has been an absolute shambles from start to finish. I cannot remember any such unceremonious fall from grace, Lewis. This is absolutely remarkable in any media at all. Maybe Star Wars Episode 1. That is the only other thing that I can think of that was so hyped at the time and came crashing down very, very hard. Honestly, this is just embarrassing for CDPR. We've absolutely lost all confidence in this as a quality studio, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word you used there, embarrassing, is absolutely accurate. It's been a mess. There's no two ways about it. I mean, there'll be defenders of the studio, there'll be defenders of the game, absolutely. And people are enjoying it if they can get it to run. Fair enough. We both still think it looks like a good game that we're excited to play once it is tidied up, but yeah, it has been a shambolic launch, and yeah, it just does not seem to be getting any better for CDPR now with this investigation into what they've done effectively. Have they done anything? Did they deliberately mislead people? That'll be a really interesting thing to get some answers to. It certainly looks like they did to me.
Absolutely.
But who could have imagined? Like, we all, I think, we're quite flippant even about kind of going, oh, it's Cyberpunk, it's the biggest thing ever, it's going to be one of the most amazing, world-changing games ever to be released, and
it's garbage.
Yeah, and coupled with people's expectations of CDPR because of how great they were, particularly around the launch and the long tail of The Witcher 3, they'd built up so much credibility, they'd built up so much trust in the eyes of gamers, and yeah, if they were to announce The Witcher 4 tomorrow, would you be excited about it? Would you be nervous about it? And I think that is quite a telling question.
Absolutely. It will be very, very, very interesting to see the results of these investigations, Lewis, I've got to say. Very interesting indeed. Alright, Lewis, news item number 4. During Sony's CES conference, they have weirdly confirmed a bunch of game release dates. If you don't know what CES is, it's just a big technology trade show, basically. But they announced in a little trailer that Hitman 3 would be coming out in January 2021, but we already knew that. We know that it's coming out in January the 20th. Returnal would be coming out on March the 19th, which again we already knew. Kena, Bridge of the Spirits, would be coming out on March 2021, which we did not know before. Solar Ash would be coming out on June 2021, which we did not know before. Solar Ash being from the creators of Hyper Light Drifter. Little Devil Inside would be coming out on July 2021. Ghostwire Tokyo would be coming out in October 2021. Again, we did not know that. Stray, which is the one where you play as the wee mad cat, is also coming out in October 2021. And Ratchet and Clank and Horizon Forbidden West have just been given a 2021 release window. We knew that already as well. Then Project Athia, which is the upcoming Square Enix exclusive that kind of looks like Mad Tomb Raider, is apparently coming out in January 2022. And Pragmata, which is that weird looking, almost Kojima-esque game, dare I say, from Capcom, is apparently coming out in 2023. No mention of God of War 2, which to me further confirms that game does not have a release date worth talking about, because they probably don't even know when it's going to come out. And then the other two titles, the sort of far out titles, Project Athia and Pragmata. Apparently these have been delayed. I've heard people speak about the fact that they've been delayed, but those projects are so far away that to call that a delay is probably a bit disingenuous, to be completely honest with you. They probably have a window that they're trying to hit, but if the game has to move around a few months at this stage in the development, that's probably not a big deal for people like PlayStation or for their developers, you know? It's when it sort of comes down to crunch time at the end where it becomes a big problem. So I'm not really sure that I would be calling those a delay as such. I mean, one of them doesn't even have a proper name, for fuck's sake. Do you know what I mean? One of the things that I also thought was interesting, though, is that Ratchet and Clank only has a 2021 release window. And I sort of thought that would be coming out a little bit soon. So maybe that's a wee bit further off than we were thinking, considering some of the other games that have got dates here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, starting there with Ratchet and Clank, I've got to say I felt exactly the same. I was pretty confident we would see that quite early in the year. In my head, at least, it was first half, although I guess that they haven't necessarily given us any reason to think that, except the amount of gameplay.
It's just because it was shown off so early when they were showing the PS5, you know what I mean? And they were spotlighting it quite a lot. They made me think that it was coming sooner,
you
know?
They were able to show us stuff at that point that looked like fully rendered, pretty close to finished gameplay, which most of the other games that they've showed in that initial showcase weren't, you know, or they had a little flash of gameplay but it was largely cinematic. So yeah, I'm a little surprised at that. I think otherwise, though, what we're seeing is a really, again, assuming that most, if not all of these games hit their dates, we're seeing a really incredible lineup for the year for PlayStation. I mean, there's some hopefully fantastic games amongst those, some big titles that are important for shifting consoles, and yeah, to get some more dates around them to be more clear on when some of those are coming out, I think is fantastic. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that this is looking really good indeed. I mean, Hitman 3 is only a week away at this point, you know. There's been a lot of trailers come out for it recently. The VR mode is looking absolutely insane for that game, I've got to say. If you're a PSVR player, I would definitely look into that. Then Returnal's coming in March. Kena is coming in March as well, an indie game that I think looks really, really interesting. Then you've got Deathloop coming in May. That wasn't mentioned in this announcement, but we know that that's coming May the 21st. Then you've got Solar Ash in June, which, if you're a fan of Hyper Light Drifter, it is screaming Hyper Light Drifter in terms of its art style. Then The Little Devil Inside, which again looks like a really, really interesting indie game. I know that you were particularly interested in that as well. This looked a sort of like a weird dark adventure game, which again is coming in July. Then you've got Ghostwire Tokyo, which is coming in October. Stray, which is also coming in October, which again is a weird indie game that's definitely something to keep your eye on. And then towards the end of the year, you've almost certainly got Horizon Forbidden West. Throw a Ratchet and Clank in there. You've got Gran Turismo 7 for your racing fans. I mean, I think that's pretty great, to be honest, man. Like, I think that is a pretty bloody good year one for the PlayStation 5. And I know that last week we were talking about the year one for the Xbox and we were a little bit down on it. And I think that the reason that we were a little bit down on it, despite with their amazing services and how amazing Games Pass is, like in terms of new games coming, I think it's in the face of this that we say that about Xbox, because that is incredible to me.
Yeah, you're spot on there. I mean, there's obviously going to be some great games coming to the Xbox, and this list, by and large, admits third-party games. And I'm pretty sure there are one or two others coming this year that are at least timed PlayStation exclusives. Oddworld being the one that jumps into my head in terms of console.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Which wasn't mentioned in that show, but is coming to PlayStation. So there are more games even than that pretty comprehensive list you've just run through of exciting games, of varied games from different different genres, different ideas. It's a really stacked lineup, and obviously some of them might slip. It does make me wonder, is there a chance that Horizon doesn't hit 2021, given just that they might feel like they don't have to because there's so much else coming out?
Lewis, we're not allowed to speak those words. We're not allowed to say bad things like that. We cannot think that way. And I'm not going to lie, that was a niggling thing in the back of my head, but I refuse to vocalise that.
Well, I am the naysayer of the pair. So, I think if these games come out this year, if even just 3/4 of them were to hit their dates, it would be a pretty special year for PlayStation gamers. And obviously a lot of those games are going to end up on Xbox and other consoles and on PC and stuff down the line. So great games for everyone to enjoy. But yeah, it's a really strong thing for Sony in a relatively obscure showcase. I know it's an enormous event, but in terms of gamer eyes looking for information, aren't necessarily watching it. Within that show, they've just cleaned up quite a lot of open questions about their lineup this year. So yeah, it's fantastic. It's
fantastic to hear, man, definitely. Odd location to choose to do it, but fantastic to hear.
I love, by the way, your description of Project Athia as Mad Tomb Raider. I think they should put that on the box.
That's what it looks like, man. Alright, finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout-outs. Shout out number 1, it's not the first podcast of the month, but we didn't do it last week, so we're going to do free games, Lewis. Free games. On your PlayStation Plus, you can get Greedfall, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, speaking of Tomb Raider, and if you've got PS5, you can also get Man-Eater. And on your Games with Gold, you can get Little Nightmares, Dead Rising, The King of Fighters 13, and Breakdown. Xbox actually coming through there. Like Little Nightmares looks like a great game. Sometimes we shout out the Xbox free games and I've never heard of any of them, and I've heard of 3 out of 4, which is pretty good.
Yeah, a decent lineup. Yeah, they definitely put some effort in this one.
And Lewis has also told me that on the Epic Games Store this month you can get Star Wars Battlefront 2, which also ties in nicely to our Lucasfilm discussion, Lewis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's available from Thursday, the day this podcast drops. I think it's available for the entire week for free if you've got an Epic Games Store account. So jump on it if you've got any interest in that.
Now that the microtransactions have been massively nerfed. Alright, let's shout out number 2. There has been a Super Mario 3D World trailer, Lewis. Again, only a few hours ago. This literally just happened. Super Mario 3D World was, of course, a Wii U game that is being ported to the Switch and is probably going to be one of the last Wii U Switch ports, I would have thought, to be honest. But they also have this piece of added content called Bowser's Fury, and we got to see a little bit of Bowser's Fury in this trailer, which apparently sees Mario working with Bowser Jr. to take on regular Bowser, who has become gargantuan and lost all control, and that is a direct quote. Bowser actually does look fairly terrifying in this trailer, Lewis, I think anyway, and certainly by Nintendo and Mario standards. He's got a bit of Balrog going on, you know what I mean? Yeah. Big spiked shell and whatever, looking pretty grim. I actually think that this game looks great, to be honest with you, and you get to fight as a giant cat version of Mario to beat terrifying Balrog Bowser. I mean, what more can you want? What more can you want?
Yeah, I can't think of anything else that you could want from a game. I've got to say the trailer really impressed me. I hadn't paid too much attention to it because when it first got announced that the port was coming, it obviously came alongside that announcement of the classic 3D games being put out on the Switch, and that ate up all the attention basically. But this trailer was great and the new content looks really interesting. I can't wait to see more, and it's only a month away now basically.
Yes, coming on February the 12th, and I'm pretty excited about it as well, man, because it will give me a damn good excuse to spend some time with my Switch, which I feel as if I don't do enough these days, Lewis, and I think that that's Nintendo's fault. Give me some damn games, Nintendo, give me some games. Alright, shout out number 3. Square Enix have registered a bunch of trademarks related to Final Fantasy VII. The reason that this is interesting is, well, I don't really know why, because I don't actually think that this is that interesting, but a lot of people seem to be pointing out these trademarks and suggesting that it could be in relation to an upcoming announcement for the next part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, or potentially DLC. The trademarks that were registered, these were registered in Japan in December but have only recently been made public, are Ever Crisis, which relates to the Crisis Core games you would have thought, which were set in the Final Fantasy VII universe, The First Soldier, and the Shinra Electrical Power Company logo, which is something that I'm very surprised they didn't trademark in the first place. Honestly, I don't really think this is an indication of very much at all. This really could just be Square Enix doing their legal due diligence around their trademarks and their copyrighted material. Personally, I think people are reading into this too much. However, if you are someone who is interested in Final Fantasy VII Remake and does not have a PlayStation 4 or a PlayStation 5 and is an Xbox gamer or an exclusive PC gamer, know that the timed exclusivity deal with PlayStation will run out in April and should be available on your consoles pretty soon, or your PC, you know. And shout out number 4, Lewis. Awesome Games Done Quick, or AGDQ, has raised over $2.7 million for the Prevent Cancer Foundation over their week-long speed running event. I am also embarrassed to say that I forgot to shout out SGDQ, which is Summer Games Done Quick, in August, which raised over $2.3 million for Doctors Without Borders, and even in April, GDQ raised $400,000 for direct relief in aid of those affected by COVID-19, meaning that the speedrunning community and GDQ in the past 9 months have raised over $5.5 million for charity. And in 2020, the nightmare year, and that year of all years, I think that is absolutely fucking remarkable. Usually they have these massive in-person events for these charity drives, but last year, because of social distancing, because everybody's trying to self-isolate, everything was held remotely, and they still managed to raise an absolutely colossal amount of money for charity, which I honestly think is incredible. I've said it before on this podcast, and I'll say it again. I honestly think that the speedrunning community is one of the best communities in all of video games. Gamers often get a bad rap, and honestly, sometimes that is fucking justified, but the speedrunning community is all about working together to break down games, and when it comes to coming together as like a collective around GDQ, they just respond in such an incredible way, and they raise ferocious amounts of money for charity, which is just unbelievable. And honestly, they're the best fucking Let's Plays to watch. They are so fucking cool. They're the only Let's Plays I watch, and they are amazing. Even if you're not interested in speedrunning, which I honestly am not, I'm really not that interested in speedrunning any game ever, but to watch someone else do it is so impressive and incredibly entertaining, quite frankly.
Yeah, you can see some really impressive, quite bizarre, unthinkable stuff on these streams. I think one of the ones from this year that I was reading about earlier was someone playing one of the older Mario games, either blindfolded or facing away from the screen, and they were just playing it by kind of sound, I guess, which is just remarkable.
Yeah, so there's blindfolded Mario runs, is like a thing. That's mad. That's a mad thing.
Insane.
Why would anyone think to do that? I don't know, but they did, and to watch someone play a game in that manner is so fascinating, and I just love to watch them, and they raise so much money for charity, and I really don't have a bad word to say against them, you know? It's incredible. So thumbs up to the speedrunning community, and thumbs up to GDQ, who are just a fantastic organisation from what I can see from the outside anyway. Alright, Lewis, and with that, time for a beer, and then we'll be back with Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is our 2021 gaming resolutions, Lewis.
It is indeed, Mark. Yeah, so this week we're going to set up some New Year's resolutions for gaming. Little promises, little challenges to yourself that you make at the start of every year, which you generally never keep up with, basically.
Oh, no, of course not. You never keep them. You absolutely never keep them.
Yeah.
And we will not be held to these resolutions, but it's something to think about in terms of the year, I suppose.
Exactly, yeah. It's just little things about our gaming habits or our gaming lives that, you know, we've maybe wanted to change or we'd like to improve in certain ways or do something differently. So we just thought it'd be fun to gather them up at the start of the year and have a bit of a chat about how 2021 might be different for us in terms of gaming. So with that, Mark, I guess I can kick off. My first gaming resolution for 2021 is something that I've mentioned once or twice on the show over the last few months, but I'm making a firm commitment, and I think this will be the one that I definitely do stick with and live up to, and that is that for the first time in my life, Mark, in 2021, I am going to buy and play an Xbox console. Which
that's a good resolution. I like that one. That's good, and I think that you should definitely do that.
yeah. Of all of the ones I've got listed here, I think it's the one that's the most likely to happen, because day by day I am just more and more certain that proper access to Xbox Game Pass is really quite an exciting thing. And now I say a proper access to it because I do have Xbox Game Pass for PC on my laptop, but it's by no means a souped up fantastic gaming machine. It's competent and it can run some stuff, so I've been able to play a lot of smaller games from Game Pass on it. But you know, when Halo comes out, when some of these other massive Xbox games come out over the next couple of years, I want to be able to jump in and play those. And you and I both, I think, prefer the console experience by quite some distance to PC gaming.
Sure. I don't think we have any qualms saying that we are console gamers.
Console guys, yeah, exactly. I've really enjoyed PC gaming this year, particularly. This is the most I've ever done in terms of PC gaming is over the last 12 to 18 months. But there's just something about being able to boot up a console, have a bunch of games downloaded on it, and be able to immediately play them and not be fiddling about with plugging in different remotes and making sure
zero hassle, man.
Exactly,
Zero
and closing everything else down and all that stuff. So the real question for me around this resolution though, Mark, is which one to get, and that is still the open question, because for much of the past few months I've been thinking about getting a Series S because it feels like it sits nicely as that smaller brother to the PS5, but that will still allow me to play basically all of the games that I think that I would want to play on Xbox at a level that I'm quite comfortable with in terms of graphics and power. But it's only a little bit more money to get the Series X, you know, that you can always justify that to yourself, that if you just save a little bit more for a little longer, you can get the full package. And I'm still debating internally with myself whether I actually need that or if that is just the gamer in me demanding the best, you know?
Nothing wrong with demanding the best, man. Get the Series X. Get the Series X. You know you fucking want the Series X. Get the Series X. I don't know why this is a debate in your head. You can totally afford the Series X. Go and get the Series X.
That's the debate comes in around the money, obviously. It's about 250 quid difference, which, you know, is manageable, basically, a fortunate position that I'm in at the moment. So I can do that, but do I need to? Is it worth doing that? If I end up spending half of that and being able to get a Switch Pro,
I think 3 years down the line is when that decision pays for itself, because I don't think that the Series S will be a console for the next 6 to 7 years. You know what I mean? It might not be able to play all of the next gen games forever, whereas I think that the Series X will. And it'll be able to play them very, very well with no problems.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really fair point, actually. Just in terms of that length of investment, it might be the smartest thing to do, yeah. So what about you, Mark? What's your first gaming resolution for 2021?
Well, Lewis, I'm going to give you 2 for 1 here. I'm going to give you 2 at the same time because they are both things that I have mentioned on the podcast before. The first one is I'm going to try and consciously take breaks from gaming, largely between games, and the key word there is consciously, because I have mentioned over the course of the last year and on the podcast as well that sometimes I've just taken a break, but largely that break has been happenstance. It's not really been a deliberate conscious choice.
Yeah.
It's been nice when it's happened, and sort of when it's happened I've been like, oh, this is actually quite good. But I'm going to choose to consciously take breaks, usually between games. And the reason for that is because, and particularly doing the podcast, you always feel as though you have to be moving on to the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. And it can feel like a bit of a chore sometimes, rather than something that you are excited to do. And I don't want that to fade. Like, I don't want gaming to feel like it's a chore to me. I want gaming to feel like it's a great hobby that I really enjoy when I go and do it. I want to be excited to play video games, you know? I really think that taking the break will sort of energise me for that and will provide just a little buffer between what can be quite big titles, you know? And the second one is consciously recontextualise my, quotes, backlog simply into games I haven't played. And the reason why I've done this, and I actually used to have a Google spreadsheet of all the games that I wanted to get to and I wanted to play. And of course I did. But I've actually deleted that. Like, that list had a huge number of games on it, and I had all the games that I'd bought and some games that I hadn't bought that I wanted to buy that I was looking out for in sales and whatever. And I was just like, no, do away with all of this. I actually think that I was getting to like quite an unhealthy place with that.
Yeah.
And I think that recontextualizing my quotes backlog as simply games I haven't played, whether or not it's a game that I've already purchased or whether or not it's something that I want to buy, I am sort of trying to move away from buying games when they pop up in Steam sales and things like that, or on PlayStation or wherever, and literally just buying the game when I want to play it, rather than giving myself all these obligations, because it can feel, to me anyway, overwhelming, and I don't think that feeling is good, because again, it sort of contributes to the first point. It contributes to this feeling of obligation and something that you have to be moving on to, and that you have to be completing. Like, you have to be going down your backlog and ticking them off one by one by one by one, whereas you're adding to it faster than you could ever tick them off, you know? And I just think that those two things together, making a conscious effort to do both, will make me enjoy playing the games that I want to play more.
Absolutely, yeah. I think those are two great kind of pledges to yourself, which, you know, to a certain extent you've been doing for a little while now, so good to be thinking of that as like a long-term plan, as something that you've tried a bit and that has worked for you. And I think that, you know, because we've talked a little bit about kind of taking breaks from gaming before, and I think as well they're absolutely, you know, necessary and good, but that latter part as well, that trying to get out of the just the mad churn of video games, that there's so much happening all the time, so many new releases and think pieces about great old games that you need to play and this and that. It can be difficult, I think, sometimes to stay afloat and all of that. And I think probably for young guys of kind of roughly our age who don't often talk very openly about how they actually feel about stuff, that feeling of like, this thing that I have loved for a long time, I'm now actually doing in an unhealthy way, I think is important to say, and important for people to think about their own gaming habits in those terms as well. You know, just every so often take a step back, contextualize, look at what you're doing. Maybe it's totally fine and that's great, but also maybe there'll be some little things there that you could change and would not only feel better about, but would actually improve your gaming as well, you know?
Yeah, for me it's all about enjoying it, man.
Exactly, yeah.
This is a hobby, like we should be enjoying it. We should be having fun when we're playing video games. It should not feel like an obligation. It should feel like something you're excited to go and do, and that is where those two resolutions come into focus for me. And it's less about just letting it happen, particularly about like the taking breaks. It's more about saying to myself, no, like, you've played this game for like a long time, it'll probably be pretty healthy if you have a bit of a break before you start the next big endeavour, you know? But anyway, Lewis, what is your next one?
Well, speaking of big endeavours, I'll jump in there. My next one's a little bit of a cheat, and so I've expanded it slightly, because one that I genuinely have been holding on to for a little while now, and it isn't just because you're making me do it, was that in the year ahead I want to play and beat a From Software game, which I have yet to do. And obviously anyone who's been listening, at least for the past few weeks, will know that as a result of narrowly losing our Game Award predictions bet, very narrowly
1 point in
losing, I will be playing and hopefully beating Bloodborne, if it doesn't fucking beat me first, throughout 2021. I've got it installed. I'm going to try and start soon, I think.
I have to say, none of Bloodborne is as difficult as the Radiance and Hollow Knight, so you've already proven to yourself that you're capable.
Yeah, I'm going to carve that on my flesh so that I remember it at every terrible fucking moment of the game.
Jesus, that's grim, man. That's some Bloodborne shit right
exactly.
there, man.
No, but, so I wanted to just expand on that a little bit and turn it into more of a pledge to myself generally to just be a bit less afraid of long and or difficult games, because I think for just too long I've allowed myself to be like, that game is 50, 60, 70, 80 hours long, I just don't have time for that, I'm never going to play it, and that's that. Or particularly in the vein of the From Software games or Hollow Knight itself, have kind of just been put off by the fear that it's going to be so difficult that I will bounce off it and not enjoy it and not really put the effort in that it requires. And I think that I've been missing out on some really important gaming experiences because of that. And so within all of that, I want to say to myself that it isn't actually important to necessarily beat these games. Generally speaking, I will beat Bloodborne, but generally speaking, it's more just that it's worth giving a game a shot. Put 10 hours into it and get a flavour of it, even if you then decide to bounce off because you're never going to get through it. Like, I never finished The Witcher 3, which is a long game, but I did put something like 30 hours into it, and I'm so glad for having done that, even because I think to have just not had that experience at all, for me, for the types of games that I like, would have been a real miss. I just have noticed basically on the back of Hollow Knight that there is quite a large chance that I have missed out on some pretty special moments. So that is my second one for today.
I like that one, man. I like that one a lot. And to be honest with you, I hear a lot of me from like 2 or 3 years ago and what you just said just now. I feel as if I've sort of got over that hump a little bit, and honestly I credit Hollow Knight for that in a lot of ways. And it's interesting that you've just beat the Radiance and have come to that conclusion, or not just come to that conclusion, but it's interesting that those two things have coincided for us both, you know.
I'm following your path almost there in terms of how you approach this type of game, but
I don't think that's deliberate on either of our parts, but sort of. Right, well, Lewis, I think we should finish on a couple of quickfire ones. And one of my resolutions for the year, in a very gaming-specific one in a lot less nebulous term, much along the same lines as yours, is that I want to play and beat all the Dark Souls games in 2021 at some point.
Oof.
Hopefully. I'm not going to hold myself to that, but I want to at least make a start, you know. I want to at least have beat the first Dark Souls, you know. That is one of my resolutions. What about you?
That is a good one. I hope you at least make a good fist on that. My one is going to be that I want to be less of a slave to that Metacritic mark. Calling up your famous catchphrase. And that might sound weird because I don't think that, generally speaking, either of us really consider ourselves to be big slaves to the Metacritic.
No.
But there's been a few times this year that I have found that I have decided not to play a game that I was initially excited for. And just to take one example of that from fairly recently was Empire of Sin, which is a game that I had been looking forward to for months. You know, not the most hotly anticipated game on my list by any stretch, but something that I was really keen to play. And then it came out and it got pretty middling reviews, some bad reviews in certain places, and certainly around the performance of the game. And I just immediately kind of went, okay, I won't be playing that. And I just don't want to get in that position where games that genuinely have ideas or elements to them that I find interesting, that I don't give them at least a shot. Maybe, again, don't beat them, but don't at least give them a couple of hours to make my own opinion on them. I don't want to get into that position. So I'm going to do more to, even if they're mainly backlog games, to play more games that haven't necessarily reviewed well if they are games that I'm actually keen to play.
Nice one, man. I like that one a lot. And to be honest with you, I could probably take a leaf out of your book there as well, because there are definitely games that have come out that I've just went, oh, well, that's a 7. Therefore, that goes to the bottom of the pile in terms of priority when it was previously something that I was quite interested in. So, yeah, I totally get that as well. Totally get that. The final one for me, I would say, would be play more horror games, which I'm not sure how you were thinking about that, but I'm not a horror fan. Like, I don't really like horror movies. I don't like being scared. I don't really get why people do. But I feel that video games are a very good place for the horror genre to exist. I feel that your participation in the horror elements of games is much better than just having horror happen to you in film, or certainly it's more interesting to me. I mean, if you're a huge horror film fan, fair play to you, it's just not my jam. But I totally understand it in terms of video games, and your participation in it can really ramp up that tension. And I'm not interested in jump scares or any of that bullshit, because that's nothing, that's cheap. But in terms of other, perhaps darker, more games that I wouldn't be interested in usually, I think that I'm shutting off a part of gaming to myself that I think actually could be quite interesting, and that is where that has come from, basically.
Nice one. Have you got any particular game in mind there?
Maybe, but I don't want to say yet in case I don't end up playing it.
Fair enough. You can tell me in private then.
I will, yeah.
For my last one, I'll keep it real short. I just want to say that I do say this to myself every year just about, but I just want to more actively consider workplace conditions when making game purchase decisions. Just because we've seen another year where the situation for developers is not often the best, and it can put some real pressure on people. And we talk about it a lot, and I am quite proud that on the show we do foreground those issues often, but it's still so tempting to buy the new shiny big game as soon as it releases. And I think that I just want to put more emphasis on maybe not always rewarding that company for bad practices immediately with the highest value of the game that it'll ever be, you know. Some sort of redressing of that balance, I think, is important for all of us to at least consider. As we said, these aren't things that we're necessarily going to always be able to stick to, but important one to keep in mind, I think.
I think that is a hugely important thing to keep in mind, and I honestly think that from now onwards that is going to be a huge facet of video gaming, and the more and more that is brought to the forefront in the general gaming sphere, the more and more it will weigh on your mind when you go to purchase these games. So yeah, I totally understand that one as well, man. Totally understand it. But on that note, Lewis, I think we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really helps us out. I know I say this twice a week, every single week, but it really does not become less important on a weekly basis. And thank you so much to anyone that's done that for us. Whether you've just given us 5 stars or you've given us a review as well, just thank you so much. It genuinely, genuinely does mean a lot. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Unfinished Swan by Giant Sparrow. This is a game that I have already played, but I am very, very interested to see what you end up thinking of it, Lewis. I've got to say.
Yeah, I haven't made my start on it yet, but it seems like it's going to be quite a short game, so I'm just going to slot it in on my next kind of gap, but really excited to get going with it. You particularly were singing its praises when you played it in quite a surprising way, so looking forward to that.
Yeah, it definitely really surprised me as a game. It was a really short experience and it goes pretty cheap. No excuse not to play along with us, so please do, and you can let us know on social media and things like that if you do. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.